From our JBS studios, I'm Mark Golub on this special In the News, coming to you live on this gorgeous Friday afternoon, as we're about to hear the President of the United States, Barack Obama, speak to American Jews who are part of the Jewish Federations of North America and who are part of American Jewish leadership through the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations. And if you saw my conversation with Jerry Silverman, you know that this meeting with the President and American Jewry, was suggested by the JFNA and the President's Conference. And what we expect to see and hear is the President speaking for about 15 minutes, and then he'll be answering questions from members of JFNA, questions which he has already had a chance to see and prepare for. And then after the meeting concludes, we'll have a chance to hear reaction and analysis from a number of outstanding minds in the Jewish world, and we hope to have time to open the phones and give you a chance to weigh in with your own reactions to the President's message to American Jewry, and to offer his own incisive opinion and analysis. I am so very pleased to be joined once again in studio by a gentleman with a keen observation of Jewish life today, who brings analysis to the issues confronting the state of Israel and world Jewry, a wonderful novelist and author, Thane Rosenbaum, Distinguished Fellow at NYU Law School and Director of their Forum on Law, Culture, and Society. How wonderful it is to have you sitting next to me again. Thank
Mark,
you. Thank you.
I always enjoy being here. As you know, becoming your sidekick has always been a career aspiration, and I'm getting close.
You are officially the sidekick.
This is an important...
Except you honor me. No.
This is an important show. It does something that no other show does, and I want to be a part of it.
Thank you. Well, I'm thrilled that you're here. All right, Thane, what do we expect to see or hear today from the President? And he's about to, according to the way it's been publicized, the President will begin at 10 after 2. It's about 5 after 2 now. So we have a few minutes, and I get a chance to talk to Thane. And as soon as the President comes on, we'll switch to the President. What do you expect to see or hear today, Thane?
I'm completely mystified. You know, he said so many things, and he said it in so many different ways, and he tried to speak to so many different constituencies within and outside the Jewish community. I mean, maybe today he'll speak Yiddish. He'll deliver a bar mitzvah speech. I mean, I think the one thing I think he might do is, you might have read a report recently that the Defense Department sent to Israel one of the negotiators off the Iran team. I think his name is Stubin. I don't know if that's his name. And his purpose for that visit is to just reassure the Israelis that the sanctions, in fact, could snap back, that there are ways in which the Iranians could be punished, and the United States could send a message through its own, again, sanctions mechanism that could reinstate the sanctions and to send a message to Iran that when you cheat, we will be watching. And I think that idea of verification is still something that is profoundly important to those people who oppose the deal. And I think that the President needs to respond to that still.
Okay. I think there'll be one more thing. I think you say it beautifully. I think there'll be one more thing. I want your reaction. I think he's going to make promises through the American Jewish community that he's speaking with today to the state of Israel about what military hardware the United States promises to give Israel, that in essence what this deal requires America to do is provide enough assurance that the weaponry Israel will have will be good enough to protect Israel if Iran does anything that begins to break out towards a nuclear weapon. What do you think?
I think you're quite right. He may do that. But I think the best response to that is we've now freed up, through sanctions relief, hundreds of billions of dollars that are going to be used to sponsor terrorism all throughout the Middle East. Hezbollah, Hamas, everyone's going to become a beneficiary of this deal. So I look at it and think, of course the President needs to make those kinds of reassurances. We've just lit up the Middle East. We've just made it possible for the entire place to be involved in a regional nuclear catastrophe. So I would hope that the President would say, in return for which I'm going to try to muscle up the Israelis' hardware as well. I also think this is a president that's been frustrated for years in the sense that Jews don't like me. In fact, I'm the best president they've ever had. And I think that this is going to be another Valentine to the Jewish community. I have always had Israel's back. I will continue to have Israel's back. I'm deeply wounded every time it's suggested to me that I have any hostility towards the Israeli people or that I am in any way minimizing their existential dilemma.
By the way, do you feel that that is an honest expression on his part? Whether we view that he's made mistakes or not, do you feel that the president honestly believes he is pro-Israel and a friend of the Jews?
I think it is so complicated, Mark. I mean, this is a man who had Jeffrey Wright, I forget, Stephen Wright. Jeffrey Wright was his minister. Reverend Wright, for 20 years. This is a man, yes, he has Jewish friends from Chicago, but they're not synagogue-going friends. It's a different kind of connection to the Jewish people.
Yes, but your point is he may try once again to tell the Jews he's speaking to today, I have always been enormously pro-Israel.
Yeah.
I care about and I have an empathy for Jewish and Jewish tradition. And the question is he lying, or is he, from his own perspective, saying what he thinks is the truth?
Look, this is a president from day one who has a very profound anti-colonial bent.
Yes.
From day one.
Yes, I hope everybody hears you. Anti-colonial.
Yeah, and Israel gets lumped into a colonial power.
Correct.
They are a Western nation that are now oppressors of Arab peoples throughout the Middle East. That's how it's perceived. So yes, I think on the one hand, he's been among Jews. He's had Jewish mentors. He's a very smart man. He understands that Israel's the only democracy in the Middle East. But his heart is always, I think, with those people who are those who are perceived to be persecuted by
the underdog,
by the colonial
yes,
powers.
Yes.
And to him, Israel is a colonial power.
Yes, but I think you've said it exactly correct. And that creates the tensions and the problems we're dealing with now. At the same time, there are people who have come on JBS and have called the president an anti-Semite. I get emails telling me the president of the United States is an anti-Semite. That's different than saying he has a worldview where he has sympathy for the underdog, and he may have real positive feelings about Israel, but be critical of Israel in certain respects. Do you feel the president is an anti-Semite? When you hear that kind of criticism, how do you evaluate it?
Look, I don't know him. I don't think he is an anti-Semite. I am troubled that he spent 20 years on Sundays listening to an anti-Semite who was his spiritual leader. But the evidence here is that he has issues with Israel, and they've been profound issues. His decision to deliver a speech in Cairo and then not visit Israel was heard loudly in the Middle East and among American Jewry, and it has made people from the very outset suspicious. Do you understand this situation? Mm-hmm. Remember, when President Obama was running for office, he famously visited Sderot, and he said, and this was his moment, this concession, I get it. If my daughters were ever faced with this kind of an existential threat when they go to sleep each night, I would do everything in my power to protect them. Everyone heard that and said, aha, he understands. But it's not true. From that time on, his rhetoric, what he was upset with, a certain kind of even-handedness between what's happening in the West Bank, certainly what's happening in Gaza, and Israel's experience in trying to defend itself, hasn't suggested that he was serious about what it means to have two daughters sleeping under that kind of rocketry.
Mm-hmm. Again, I find the entire issue very complicated. There are Jews, intelligent, well-meaning Jews, who think I'm making a serious mistake by saying the issue is complicated. That to some of them, this issue is as simple and clear as night and day. Where do you stand on how America and how American Jews and how Americans in general should now be reacting to the deal that is being considered in Congress? To what extent, to you, Thane, is it complicated? Is it clear and easy?
It's complicated only because of our president, who has attempted to create a great deal of complexity around this question. And the reason for that is because, remember, this is a president who is not a wartime president. I mean, I wish this is what he would say today. He would say, I'm never the kind of guy that's ever going to want to be marching troops anywhere. I'm not the kind of guy that wants to authorize any kind of retaliation. That's not, I will always choose a deal. I'm a law professor. I will always assume that two people talking can get something accomplished. I don't even care who's on the other side. Remember, when he ran for president, he said, I'll meet with the Iranians without preconditions. So he's saying, I don't demonize. I don't see evil easily.
Is there value to that?
Look, I think that he's been naive in underestimating what's happened in the Middle East during his presidency. I think he's misread Arab Spring. I think he doesn't understand what value Mubarak had to America's interests. I think that he's had a kind of twisted understanding of realpolitik. And his realpolitik is, I just don't believe in war. And I just think anything that delays a war is always a good thing. If it's 5 years, if it's 2 months, it's better. And this deal delays something. And instead of saying, yeah, but it also opens up the possibility for war that may not have existed, I just don't think he sees that. And I think that that's why it's complicated. Because the simplicity of, do you understand who's on the other side of this negotiating table?
But wait, I don't believe many Americans do understand.
I think that's right. I think that's right. And I think that many American Jews are struggling with this because they too come from similar sensibility. This is our president.
And none of that. But we Jews don't want war.
Yeah.
You don't want war.
Yeah.
If it's possible to avoid war, we avoid war. But it's different if you're delaying a war, which if you fight later is going to put you at a disadvantage.
I also think we've been lulled into thinking everything's the Soviet Union. And I know the people in this station who work here know this issue a lot better than I do. But I just think...
That's a brilliant point. Yeah, expand.
I think we're lulled into thinking that this is what Cold Wars look like, where we don't really get to fight anybody.
We don't need to fight anybody.
We don't fight anybody.
Right.
We just build more weapons, and we have cold shoulders during Cold Wars.
Yes.
And, we can support our...
How bad an enemy is Iran?
This is not something we've seen before. This is just different. And I think that most Americans don't want to see it that way. This is far off. This is all the way in, the old Persia. You can't get there with a magic carpet anymore. And I think that to them, this is distance. It has nothing to do with us. And I think they don't understand.
Right. I am going to have to pause for 1 second. Right now I'm being told, and I can see something on the screen. Sloan, let's go right now to the actual broadcast, the meeting between Barack Obama and American Jewry. Then we'll come back.
The President of the United States, Barack Obama. So, Mr. President, I can equivocally state to you that our entire community is united in its desire to ensure that Iran never acquire a nuclear weapon. We know, sir, that that's a goal that you have personally declared. And we also know it's one that's shared by all the members of Congress and the American people. So, sir, whatever differences may exist as to how best to achieve that goal, they're neither political nor are they personal. Mr. President, we all want to, and we must emerge from this process united. We must reaffirm our commitment, that special relationship between the United States and the Israeli people and the Israeli government. We must be vigilant, totally vigilant in our fight against global terrorism and all of its supporters. And we certainly, sir, must dedicate ourselves to making sure that Iran complies with all the requirements in the agreement, U.S. law, and UN regulations. Mr. President, people of goodwill may differ on the approach, but never the objective. There's just too much at stake. We're so grateful to you that you've taken the time to speak today to leaders and members of the Jewish community as we continue to educate and inform our constituents about this most critical issue. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to present the President of the United States, Barack Obama.
Well, Steve, thank you very much. Thank you, Michael. And I think the approach I'm going to take is to make some informal remarks at the top, and then I want to spend most of the time hearing from some of the questions that have already been submitted. But I really want to thank the conference, the federations for helping to host this. And I know you've already had a chance to hear from the Secretary of Energy, Ernie Moniz, who went through, no doubt, many of the technical aspects of the deal that has been shaped by the P5+1. What I want to do is just step back and remind everybody how we got here. When I ran for office, I made a series of commitments, a series of promises to the American people. One of those commitments was that Iran would not get a nuclear weapon. Another commitment was that I would do everything in my power as President of the United States to preserve the unbreakable bond between the United States and Israel and to ensure Israel's security. A third commitment was that, given the lessons of the previous decade, I would never hesitate to use military force where necessary to protect America, its friends and allies around the world, but that I would always first try a diplomatic approach, not only because war inevitably creates unintended consequences and great pain and hardship, but also because sometimes diplomacy is more effective in achieving our goals. And the deal that the P5+1 has struck accomplishes each of those promises and commitments that I made when I ran for office. I know that many people who are listening know the basic outlines of the deal, but I just want to reiterate the core of it. This deal blocks every way, every pathway that Iran might take in order to obtain a nuclear weapon. It makes sure that the centrifuges that are currently in Natanz are removed, except for a handful, and it makes sure that they cannot immediately use more advanced centrifuges to build up their capacity to create enriched uranium that might be diverted into a weapons program. The underground facility of Fordow is converted into a research facility and no longer will have in it centrifuges that could be used to create nuclear weapons or nuclear materials and might be difficult to reach. The heavy water facility at Iraq that, if struck by a missile, could create a plume and thereby is more difficult to deal with, that is going to be reconfigured. So you have the existing facilities being transformed. You have a commitment in which stockpiles of highly enriched uranium are being shipped out. We create then a verification and inspection mechanism across the entire nuclear production chain within Iran that is unprecedented, more rigorous than anything that has ever been negotiated in the history of nuclear nonproliferation. And we also preserve the capacity to snap back all the various sanctions provisions that we put in place very systematically, my administration, working in concert with our partners over the last 5 years, sanctions that ultimately brought Iran to the table. We have the capacity to snap those back in the event that Iran cheats or does not abide by the terms of the deal. So what we have done is, for the first 10 years, essentially restricted Iran's capacity not just to weaponize nuclear power, but we severely constrain any nuclear program, peaceful or militarized. After 10 years, they're able to obtain some additional advanced centrifuges, but they continue to have to be carefully monitored in terms of the stockpiles that they produce. And even critics of this deal acknowledge that for the first 15 years or so, we have extended the breakout time so that not only are we on them constantly observing what they're doing, but if they decided that they wanted to break the deal, we would have ample time to respond in ways that prevented them from getting a nuclear weapon. The breakout time would be significantly longer than it is right now. So because of the stringency of the deal, The vast majority of experts on nuclear proliferation have endorsed this deal. The world is more or less united, with some significant exceptions, obviously, the State of Israel and perhaps others less publicly, around the deal. You have seen people who are unlikely bedfellows, Brent Scowcroft and Elizabeth Warren endorse the deal. We have said to members of Congress, we are prepared to answer every single question and have provided exhaustive hearings on every element of this. The criticisms of the deal have really come down to a few buckets, and maybe I'll just address those very quickly up front. Number one, people have said that, well, Iran will cheat. They're not trustworthy. And I keep on emphasizing, we don't trust Iran. Iran is antagonistic to the United States. It is anti-Semitic. It has denied the Holocaust. It has called for the destruction of Israel. It is an unsavory regime. But this deal doesn't rely on trust. It relies on verification and our capacity to catch them when they cheat and to respond vigorously if they do. And it's precisely because we are not counting on the nature of the regime to change that it's so important for us to make sure that they don't have a nuclear weapon. And this is the best way to do it. A second argument I've heard is, well, they are going to, in 15 years, have the ability to break out, and they'll be more powerful. But in fact, we're not giving away anything in this deal in terms of our capacity to respond if they chose to cheat. We are not giving up our ability to respond militarily. We're not giving up our ability to impose sanctions. Any of the tools that critics of the deal are suggesting we could be applying now, we'll be able to apply in 15 years, but we'll have the advantage of a deal that the entire world has ratified, that Iran has committed to, saying that it's not going to have a nuclear weapon. We will have purchased 15 years of familiarity with their program so that we know exactly what's going on. And so anybody sitting in my chair 15 years from now will be in a much stronger position to respond if they, at that point, decide to break out than a president would next year or the year after. Number three, people have suggested that this will give a windfall to Iran, and they will be able to conduct more terrorist activity and destabilizing activity in the region. And I want to make sure people have some perspective here. Iran's defense budget is $15 billion a year. By comparison, ours is around $600 billion. Because of the unprecedented partnership we have with Israel, Israel's a much stronger military. Our Gulf partners spend 8 times as much money as Iran does on their military. So Iran is a regional power. It's not a superpower. The money that they're obtaining is money that has been frozen under sanctions. They will get about $56 billion back, but they're going to have to spend that to prop up an economy that's been crushed by our sanctions. Their economy will improve modestly, but there's no analysis that's been done by our experts that suggests that they're going to have a qualitatively different capacity to engage in some of the nefarious activities that they've done before. That's not to say that those aren't very serious issues. We have to stop Iran from getting missiles to Hezbollah that threaten Israel. We have to stop their destabilizing activities using proxies in other parts of the region. But to do that requires us to better coordinate with our partners, improve our intelligence, continue to build on things like Iron Dome that protect populations from missiles coming in over the border. And those are all things that we have to do anyway. We're in a much better position to do it if we also know, in the meantime, that Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapon. That's the one game changer, and that's why it has to be our number one priority. So let me just close this initial set of comments by saying something about the U.S.-Israel relationship that you raised, Steve. the bond between the United States and Israel is not political. It's not based on alliances of convenience. It is something that grows out of family ties and bonds that stretch back generations, and shared values and shared commitments and shared beliefs in democracy. And like all families, sometimes there are going to be disagreements. And sometimes people get angrier about disagreements in families than they do with folks who aren't family. I understand that. But we've repeatedly throughout the history of the United States and Israel had times where the U.S. administration and the Israeli government had disagreements. And that does not affect the core commitments that we have to each other. And throughout my administration, even my fiercest critics in Israel would acknowledge that we've maintained unprecedented military cooperation, unprecedented intelligence coordination. We have not only maintained but enhanced the degree of military assistance that we provide, including helping to fund things like the Iron Dome program that has protected and saved lives inside of Israel. And what I have said repeatedly is that as soon as this particular debate is over, my hope is that the Israeli government will immediately want to rejoin conversations that we had started long before about how we can continue to improve and enhance Israel's security in a very troubled neighborhood. But what I would emphasize is that the commitment to Israel is sacrosanct, and it is nonpartisan. It always has been, and it always will be. I would suggest that in terms of the tone of this debate, everybody keep in mind that we're all pro-Israel. We're all pro-U.S. Israel, and we have to make sure that we don't impugn people's motives, even as we have what is a very serious debate about how best to protect the United States, Israel, and the world community from a potentially destabilizing Iranian nuclear weapon. So with that, why don't I open it up for some questions.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's my honor to represent the thousands of very concerned members of our community to have this opportunity to talk to you about the Iranian deal. As you can imagine, we have thousands of viewers and thousands of questions that have been submitted, and we've read them all, believe it or not. I don't know that I've read them all, but we've read them all, and as you might suggest and assume, there's quite a divergence of opinion on this issue and its implications, but there are some clear themes. So I would say and ask you, it's been over a month since you announced the agreement with Iran, and those who support it and those who are against it have made their views known at this point. And in the debate, there has been heated rhetoric from both sides that has crossed the acceptable lines of even tough political discourse. So American Jewish supporters of the deal have been called ugly names, while opponents have been accused of warmongering and worse. And so many of these allegations come with sort of deep anti-Semitic undertones. Needless to say, this uncivil rhetoric has made our community very uncomfortable. During your time in office, you have been clear about your opposition to anti-Semitism in all of its repugnant forms. So, Mr. President, what is your reaction to the use of this hateful rhetoric, and what can we do collectively to elevate the dialogue?
Well, Michael, as I mentioned, I think that people of goodwill can come down on different sides of this issue, although I would challenge a little bit the notion that there has been sort of an equivalence on both sides of heated rhetoric. The truth of the matter is that when Jerry Nadler, for example, a person who, for personal reasons, but also political integrity, has consistently stood by Israel, is attacked in ways that are appalling. A man of conscience who had the courage to oppose the Iraq vote at a time when that was very unpopular and was proven right. That is the kind of stuff that I think people have to be deeply concerned about. Those who support the deal, I think, have, certainly my administration and me, have tried to stay focused on what we think are the logical conclusions and facts based on the nature of the deal and what alternatives are available. And at no point have I ever suggested, for example, that somebody is a warmonger, meaning they want war. What I have said, and this I don't apologize for, is that if this deal is rejected, if we do not have this mechanism that nuclear experts around the world have said is unprecedented and severely constrains Iran's program, then there have to be alternatives. There has to be a better way to accomplish our goal of making sure Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapon. Critics have suggested that that doesn't have to mean military actions. We could, for example, just impose unilateral sanctions and double down and squeeze Iran harder. The problem there is that we actually have experience of unilateral sanctions without the support of the world community. That's what was happening before I came into office, and it didn't work. Iran accelerated its nuclear program unimpeded because we did not have global cooperation. My administration cobbled together that global cooperation, and it was premised on the notion that if, in fact, we got a deal that prevents Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, then those sanctions would be lifted. If now we rejected the opinion of the world community, then it is unlikely, and this is not just my opinion, you've heard it from ambassadors from these countries, that they would maintain those sanctions. So that does not end up being an option. Once you've cut off those options, the deal that I'm proposing and the ability to maintain long-term sanctions of the sort that we put in place previously, then at that point we really don't have options, because we're already at a point where Iran's breakout time is relatively short and we're kind of flying blind. And the logical conclusion then is that for any president, me or my successor, to make sure that Iran's getting a nuclear weapon, I'm going to have to resort to some sort of military action, because there aren't going to be a lot of other options available to us, not many tools left in the toolkit. Mm-hmm. And I make that point, Michael, because that's not to suggest that opponents of this deal want war. What it is a sober analysis of what options we have available to us and why it's so important, I think, for us to get behind this deal and not pretend that there are other easier options that are available to us. But in all this debate, what's important to remember is that we're all pro-Israel and we're all family. And the Jewish members in Congress who are supporting this deal, I don't need to give you their biographies. I think they feel a commitment to Israel and have a knowledge of Jewish history that rivals anyone else's. And those in my administration who care deeply about this issue and who are supporting this deal, their motives shouldn't be questioned. And those who oppose it, my view is that they have a sincere concern, because just as the people in Israel have a sincere concern, when you have a regime that denies the Holocaust, that's going to make you worried. You got to take that seriously. And so I recognize where the anxieties come from. But I think that it's important for us to remember the bonds that hold us together more than that go well beyond this particular issue.
Well, thank you. I want to expand a little bit on a comment you made in your remarks about the divisiveness that's been going on. It's been divisive in Congress. It's been divisive in the Jewish community and to some degree across America. And it's been obviously to some degree some concern about the divisiveness between the United States and the Israel relationship, maybe just at the governmental level. But regardless how the vote takes place, many of the viewers are concerned about the disagreements, that the deal may have created some distance. We've heard about that. You commented on it between the governments of the United States and Israel, and our community gets very, very unsettled and very anxious when there is daylight between our positions. And so while we have received hundreds of questions on this in this regard, what I'd like to ask you, and you made a comment about how do we re-energize and how do we recreate the dialogue that was occurring before this deal. So how do you see us re-energizing the relationship between Israel and the United States?
I'll be honest with you. I think this is going to happen pretty quick because we both have a shared interest in not just preventing Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, but also making sure that they're not sending weapons to Hezbollah, that they're not destabilizing, that Iran's not destabilizing its neighbors. So not only do we have a shared history, shared values, not only are we family, but even on this particular issue of Iran, we agree more than we disagree. And so, as I indicated earlier, we've been in discussions with the Israeli government for months now about the importance of us getting back on track in working together to enhance our security cooperation, to think about what are the next generations of missile defense programs that we can set up. How do we improve our intelligence and interdiction to prevent arms from being sent to terrorist organizations? How do we counteract Iranian proxies in the region? And those are all things that we should be doing anyway, even if we weren't having this debate on the Iranian deal. I've heard some suggest that the reason I'm calling for all this enhanced cooperation is to compensate for the fact that Iran's going to be more dangerous after this deal. Nothing could be further from the truth. These are things that I've been suggesting we need to be doing consistently. And we will be much safer once this deal is in place and we know that Iran's not getting a nuclear weapon. But it doesn't solve all the problems we have with Iran. And Israel knows that. We know that. So those conversations, I think, will move rapidly, and I think they will move smoothly. In terms of differences generally between the U.S. government and the Israeli government, I've said this before. Sometimes I have arguments with friends, and sometimes I have different views. What I found, after 54 years on this earth, is that my best friends are the ones who I can be honest with. And if I think that they're wrong on something, I got to be able to say it. And if they think I'm wrong, they've got to be able to give voice to it. That's what being good friends means. And I know that sometimes that makes it difficult for members of the Jewish community because, as you said, the preference is no daylight, and that means no arguments. But that actually can be dangerous itself if it leads us to make bad decisions that ultimately are bad for the national security of both countries. Better to air these things out, even if it's sometimes uncomfortable, as long as the tone is civil and as long as we keep our eye on the big picture, which is the fates of our two countries are always going to be intertwined.
Great. Thank you, Mr. President. On that, we have, as you indicated, we're all aware of the very bad neighborhood that exists around Israel and how the news seems to be getting a little bit tighter. You wrote to Congress recently, and we received many questions regarding the issue of the neighborhood and the threats of the neighborhood. So we have a question from Randall Meacham of Durham, North Carolina, who says...
Great town.
Yeah, it really is. Good colleges. It says, will America continue to help Israel maintain its strategic and qualitative military edge in the region?
Yes. That's always been a priority of ours. That's a central policy of the United States through both Democratic and Republican administrations. My administration, as I said before, has consistently applied that principle in concrete ways, and will continue to do so. We think it's very important that our strongest ally in the region, our closest friend, is able to protect itself. And I know that that's something that I've had repeated conversations with Prime Minister Netanyahu about. It's not just that the United States will come to the aid of our friends and neighbors. I think in light of the tragic history of the Jewish people, there is a legitimate and understandable desire on the part of Israel to make sure that it can protect itself from whatever threats may arise. And that's why the QME, the qualitative military edge, is so important, and that's why you've had bipartisan support for the concrete manifestations of that in weapons systems and military aid, and there are a host of consultations that have already been taking place on that that will continue long into the future.
Thank you for your answer on that one. We have another question from one of our viewers, a Donald Ashkenazi from Great Neck, New York, who wants to know the risks of the deal. So we've got 4 questions, much like our Passover Seder has 4 questions, which I know you do at the White
Absolutely.
House. I haven't been invited, but okay.
Oh.
It says, aren't you concerned, so I'll read them, aren't you concerned that after 15 years, Iran will have access to the highly enriched uranium that they need to build the nuclear weapon, one of the things you talked about? Do you worry at that time, that Iran might build as large a nuclear infrastructure as they want? What about others in the region? And do you expect that others will also insist on building comparable nuclear infrastructures? And then lastly, and importantly, how does this deal reduce the risk of nuclear proliferation in the region?
Good. You know, one thing that might be helpful is to understand sort of what a lot of this argument's been about. I think that in the best of all worlds, Iran would have no nuclear infrastructure whatsoever. There wouldn't be a single nut, bolt, building, nuclear scientist, uranium mine anywhere inside of Iran. And that, I suppose, would be the single guarantee that Iran never has a nuclear weapon, unless it purchased one, of course, from North Korea, which it could also do. Unfortunately, that's not a reality that's attainable. And those who say they want a better deal, that this isn't a good deal and they want a better deal, typically mean that not only do they want Iran not to have nuclear weapons, but they don't want them to have any nuclear program at all, even a peaceful one. The problem is that even Iranians who oppose this regime believe that Iran should have the right to peaceful nuclear programs. The world community, not just the Russians or the Chinese, but the Europeans, the Indians, the Japanese, others, they all believe that under the Non-Proliferation Treaty, you are allowed to have peaceful nuclear power. You just can't have a weapon. So this deal is designed to essentially put Iran in the penalty box for the first 15 years, where even its peaceful nuclear program is severely constrained. After 15 years, assuming they've abided by that deal, they can then start opening up their peaceful nuclear program, but their prohibition on weaponizing nuclear power, that continues in perpetuity and will continue to be monitored by the toughest inspection regime that exists under the current international rules called the Additional Protocol. And we'll still be monitoring it very carefully, and we will have had 15 years of knowledge about what their program is. Now, is it possible that at the end of 15 years, they now start introducing some more advanced centrifuges, and at some point they feel comfortable enough, cocky enough, where they say to themselves, now's the time for us to break out. We're going to kick out all the IAEA inspectors. We're going to announce that we're going to pursue a nuclear weapon. Is that possible? Absolutely. Just as it's possible they could have done that next week if we hadn't had this deal. The question then becomes, have we given up any ability to respond forcefully? And as I indicated in my opening remarks, we will have not given anything up. When I came into office, I talked to the Pentagon to say it's not enough for us just to beat our chest and rattle our sabers. Do we have specific plans in terms of how we would respond, if necessary, to Iran dashing for the goal line and getting a nuclear weapon? And we prepared and made sure that we could respond. And we have shared a lot of information with our Israeli partners and our other partners in the region about our confidence in our capacity to respond. A president of the United States 15 years from now is not going to be in a worse position to respond. He'll be in a stronger position, or she will be in a stronger position to respond. And so that's something that I feel great confidence about. The alternative, I've never understood the logic that says because there may be issues that we have to deal with 15 years from now, we should reject a deal that ensures us for 15 years not having a nuclear weaponized Iran, and we now are in a situation in which they could break out next year without inspectors on the ground to monitor it effectively, without the international constraints that this deal provides, and forcing us or the Israelis to make that same decision, isolated, without international legitimacy, and in a situation where even the best estimates suggest that at best a military approach at this juncture would probably forestall a determined Iran for a year or two from getting a nuclear weapon.
Thank you. So you've mentioned a few times, and I want to expand a little bit upon what you've said about Iran being an untrustworthy partner in the agreement. As we've seen, even post the agreement, we've seen the Ayatollah spew just hateful rhetoric against America, against Israel, against yourself personally, as it turns out. And so in the agreement, right, there's sort of this immediate financial relief that occurs.
Well, it's not immediate. The way this works is that they're going to have to effectively shut down Fordow as it's currently configured, the underground facility, take out the majority of the centrifuges in Natanz, the above-ground facility, entirely convert the heavy water reactor at Iraq, put in place the inspector. They've got to perform across the board, which will take them months before they then get relief.
All right, so technically they have to have certain actions and behaviors.
Well, these are big actions now. They're getting rid of 98% of their stockpile. Go ahead.
But there is financial relief,
yes,
as well as perhaps billions of dollars of additional commercial contracts that will come their way. Somewhere during the agreement, I think it's after 8 years, they get conventional weapon kind of relief from the United Nations, as well as we've seen after the expiration of time, they can do some unfettered things that we don't like about. So, and nothing in the agreement, it seems, to require them to change any of their bad behavior that they're doing. So we have a specific question from one of our audiences. I apologize for that. So from Terry Rosenberg from Boston, she asked, Mr. President, what could be done about Iranian behavior and their support of terrorism now and in the future, and what will transform, what do you believe will really transform Iran to become a more responsible global player?
Well, first of all, I think it's important because there was a lot of stuff in that question.
Yes.
So I want to unpack some of it. Nothing in this agreement prevents us from continuing to push back forcefully against terrorist activity, support for terrorist proxies in the region, destabilizing activities in the region. We are not normalizing relations with Iran here. What we are doing is taking one game-changing problem, them getting a nuclear weapon, and moving that off the board. But we are still going to be maintaining our own sanctions for Iranian violations of human rights and terrorism. Those don't go away. We are still going to not only be able to enforce our own sanctions, but UN sanctions that are separate and apart from any nuclear sanctions about Iran sending weapons to Hezbollah or other terrorist organizations that have been designated. We're still going to have all the tools in our toolbox to go after nefarious activities by Iran in the region. Now, do I hope that by virtue of Iran having greater commercial interactions with the world and students' exchanges taking place and perhaps a generation of Iranian leadership changing, do I hope that the character of the regime changes? Absolutely. But I'm not counting on it. Being for this deal does not involve pie-in-the-sky hopes about Iran. We will retain all the tools that we have to go after them. What we can't do is, because this deal doesn't solve all the problems about Iranian behavior, give up our most powerful opportunity to deal with a major part of the Iranian portfolio that would present huge problems for us, and that is them getting a nuclear weapon. So, does this deal solve every problem that we have with Iran? Not even close. Does it solve the biggest one that would cause what Prime Minister Netanyahu and others called an existential threat to Israel? That it does do. And does it ensure that, does it best ensure that we're in a position to identify what Iran's doing on its nuclear program and prevent it from weaponizing and maintaining a non-proliferation regime in the region around the world? It does.
Okay, thank you for your answer on that one. So we've received many questions about consequences, and consequences if Iran doesn't keep its end of the deal. After all, the clarity in terms of penalties for lawbreaking is a basic tenet of the American legal system. Mr. President, Mel Arnoff from California asks, please explain the details behind the snapback of sanctions and help us understand how the United States and its allies will effectively enforce consequences for the various infractions.
This is one of the unique features of this deal. The way our negotiators structured this, we don't have to have agreements from China or Russia or even our European partners. If we determine that Iran has violated this agreement, we are in a position to reimpose all of the multilateral sanctions, not just U.S. sanctions, but the sanctions that were previously in place. We can put those all back in place by that determination. Now, some critics have said, well, what if Iran has a small infraction, or they're kind of nibbling at the edges of the deal, and is a future president really going to want to blow up the whole thing just for minor infractions? And what I've said, and this was actually a very thoughtful question that Congressman Nadler and some other supporters asked, what I said to them was, we're going to be in a position to continue to turn the dials and modulate other responses other than just snapping back all the sanctions if, in fact, Iran's not doing what it's doing. And we actually have some precedent for this. Your listeners and viewers may not be fully aware that 2 years ago, when we announced the interim deal that allowed Iran to come into negotiations, they got some very modest relief from sanctions. They agreed not just to suspend their nuclear program, but also to get rid of the really highly enriched uranium that had been the subject of the cartoon drawing that Prime Minister Netanyahu had talked about as being the biggest threat at the United Nations. A lot of the same critics of this current deal said at the time, this is never going to work. Iran's going to cheat, we're not going to know, they're just stalling for time, there's going to be a floodgate of relief coming in. And we said, no, we're pretty confident we can actually monitor this thing and implement it effectively. And today, 2 years later, even our fiercest critics acknowledge that it worked exactly the way it was supposed to. They got some modest relief. They got rid of the most highly enriched uranium stockpiles that they had. They did not install new centrifuges. We monitored what they did. And so, and during the course of these 2 years, there were a couple times where they were too slow on something. They didn't quite do exactly what they were supposed to do. There were some ambiguities about their interpretation versus ours. And what we said was, well, until you get this fixed, you're not getting any more sanctions relief. And they fixed it pretty quick. So we actually have tested our capacity to enforce this. And we've got some outstanding experts who helped to build the sanctions regime in the first place. And we're confident that not only can we go all the way and snap back sanctions for a very significant breach of the agreement by the Iranians, we're going to be able to also affect their incentives to make sure that they follow the rules and the spirit of this deal over the next, over the future of the deal.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to run out of time shortly, so we're going to maybe make this last question depending on the answer. But you've spoken a great deal about the construct of mutual respect. Yeah. And in the agreement itself, it makes a number of references specifically to the mutual respect of the Iranian regime, to the United States, to the Europeans. And again, we've seen sort of a bending over backwards to some degree of our desire to be conscious of that, which is very worthwhile, but it does seem like the Iranian regime doesn't understand the mutual part of the mutual respect. So I'm just concerned how you feel about when you see these insults that are coming from the Ayatollah and the regime that says death to America, death to Israel, tweets that are incredibly repugnant. Where's the mutual respect from their side?
Well, obviously it's not forthcoming at the moment. But you know, the United States is the most powerful nation in the world. And the President of the United States doesn't respond to taunts. The President of the United States responds to interests, facts, evidence. And we try to make decisions based on what's going to be best for the security of the American people, our friends, our allies, and our values around the world. And so I'm less interested in terms of this deal in what the supreme leader says about me, more interested in what's actually happening on the ground. You'll recall that when we were in the midst of these negotiations and they were trying to be finalized, the supreme leader had all sorts of characterizations about what was going to happen in the deal, and we've, you know, out-negotiated them and beaten his chest a little bit. Because he's a politician, and I guess that's how politicians operate, even in Iran. But what I was concerned about was what's in the text, and what can we enforce, and what can we verify to make sure they're not getting a nuclear weapon. And at the end of the day, despite all the talk, both from Iran and some of the commentary here, the text reflected the political framework that we had agreed to back in April. And so, am I troubled by this rhetoric? Of course. Does it speak to a deeply antagonistic and twisted worldview among leadership inside of Iran? Yes. That's precisely why we can't let them have a nuclear weapon. And this is the best way to do it. And to the broader issues, I want to emphasize this to everybody who's watching. You know, if I lived in Israel and I'd seen rockets rain down on homes, as I've seen when I went to a place like Sderot, if my grandparents had traveled to Israel and lost family in the Holocaust, and I hear somebody denying it. I've got a visceral reaction that says, how can I do business with somebody like that? I understand it. It's loathsome. And I think it's been said repeatedly, and I think as an African American, I understand, history teaches us that man can be very cruel to man, and you have to take threats seriously. But what history also teaches us is that sometimes the best security is to enter into negotiations with your enemies. When the United States negotiated with the Soviet Union in the midst of the Cold War, we had missiles trained on every major American city. And we had to give something up in that deal. We had to actually dismantle some of our arms, and so in some ways it was a much riskier proposition, but there was a recognition among both Democrats and Republican leaderships, far-sighted, that we had the better system. The truth and values were on our side. And as long as we could maintain our capabilities and not even trust, but verify, that over time the world would shift in our direction. And we ended up winning the Cold War without firing a shot directly with the Soviet Union. So I am appreciative of the anxieties and the concerns that people have. I respect them. I'm somebody who wouldn't be sitting here if it weren't for the support of friends and supporters in the Jewish community all across this country, some of whom are watching right now, some of whom who are opposed to this deal but are still my friends and will still be playing golf, and they'll be over at a Seder dinner next year. But I would just ask everybody to look at the facts on this. And I have now had this debate for a couple months now, examined every angle on this deal, as we did in the Situation Room exhaustively before we signed off on this deal. And the fact is, this is our best way to make sure Iran doesn't get a nuclear weapon. That should be our number one priority. If we are able to accomplish that and make sure that with all the other problems that are going on in the region and all the other threats that Israel and the United States face, from ISIL and from the collapse of places like Yemen and what's happening in Syria, if we're able to take this one thing and put that away, it is going to free us up, the United States and Israel, to work together for the safety, security, and prosperity of all our people for years to come. And so there are times where you got to overcome the emotions and look at this thing, with a cold, tough assessment. And when you do that, the other side has not presented an alternative that better accomplishes that central goal. That's the reason why I'm hopeful that members of Congress get behind this deal, and I promise you that nobody's going to have a bigger stake in implementing it effectively than me.
So I get to say thank you, which I'm delighted to do. First of all, for your candor. On behalf of the entire Federation system, on behalf of the conference, we thank you for that. And I must say, I was very happy personally to hear what you just said about understanding from your history the plight that your people and the American people know. But our people, as you know, Mr. President, over the years, there have been a lot of tyrants who have threatened us. And unfortunately, we have to take them seriously. I know you appreciate that, and you know that sometimes what I said in my beginning remarks, people of goodwill always have the same objective, but there is that history there. So I know, sir, that we've tried to gather questions I'm not sure we were smart enough to cover the waterfront. And before we lose you, which we'd love to go on forever, but we know we can't, is there anything you'd like to say in closing, sir?
The one thing I want to emphasize to everybody who's watching is get informed on this. What I've said to my team, from Secretary of State Kerry to Secretary of Energy Ernie Moniz to our individuals who manage sanctions, to Treasury Secretary Jack Lew, to my entire White House staff, is we want people to be informed. We want you to ask as many questions as you can, because that's how confident I am that this is the right thing to do. I think that if, in fact, we rejected this deal, we would be putting Iran in the driver's seat. I think they would garner enormous international sympathy. They would be able to isolate the United States and Israel as the reason for the deal falling through. I think the sanctions would begin to dissolve. They would not be as effective. So ironically, Iran would get some of that $56 billion back anyway, and their economy would begin to improve anyway. And if, in fact, they are hell-bent on gaining a nuclear weapon, they would have provided the cover for them then to go try to dash for the goal line without the kinds of inspections, verifications, and mechanisms of this deal. If, on the other hand, we get this deal in place, then we will have shut off all the pathways for a minimum of 15 years. And in 15 years, if in fact what the critics say is true, and they have just been playing a waiting game, or this deal just was a pause button, I have every confidence that the President of the United States, 15 years from now, isn't going to be in a position, having made the same pledge I made, which is Iran's not getting a nuclear weapon, to take actions that are necessary, including potentially military force, to prevent them from getting a nuclear weapon, and will be in a stronger position to do so. So whatever the questions people may have, find out. This is not one of those issues where I'm interested in spinning. I just want everybody to know. The more information you have, the more confident you'll be that this is the right thing to do. And to all my friends in the Jewish community, I want you to just understand that regardless of the position people are taking on this issue, the friendship, the love between the Israeli people and the American people that manifests itself in so many different ways, that's not going anywhere. That's there. And we shouldn't, for fear that that gets lost, not have a vigorous debate about this. We should welcome a vigorous debate. That's what, that's one of the things that true friendship affords. You know that you can mix it up, and the next day you're going to be the best of friends, and that's who we are.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you again. And we look forward to continuing this conversation because we have so many issues of mutual concern. And I want to thank you not just for today, but you've always been available to us. And we look forward to continuing the worthwhile conversations we've had, and look forward to those in the future. So
that will continue. Thank you so much.
Thank
I
you
really
for your
enjoyed
time.
it.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.
So,
Thank you, sir.
The President of the United States, Barack Obama, speaking to the Jewish Federations of North America and the Conference of Presidents of major American Jewish organizations, and to America, not simply American Jewry, but America. And if you're watching on JBS right now, you got to hear it all on JBS. We're going to be asking for reaction from a number of people, and hopefully we'll have time to get a call or two in from you. And I've been on my phone, as is now the custom. People have been tweeting me and texting me, and I'm going to share some of that information with you as well. But first, Thane, what was your overall reaction? Then I'll give my overall reaction.
I was struck by that moment. It was a good moment when the president said, well, let's face it, Iran only has a $15 billion military budget, and we have a $600 billion, and we're always determined to have Israel have a qualitative edge over Iran. But if Hamas taught us anything, is qualitative edge doesn't mean anything if you're crazy, if you're just nuts, if you just have one rocket to fire and you're willing to fire it. All of them, we talked about this before, all of these allusions to the Soviet Union simply misapply because neither side was prepared to engage in mutually assured destruction. Does anyone lie awake at night worrying about the fact that the British have nuclear weapons or that the French have nuclear weapons? Hey, have you ever heard the Germans say, death to Luxembourg? You ever heard death to Luxembourg? What would we say if oh my God, they have nuclear weapons and they're saying death to Luxembourg? I think that the president, once again, very naively simply does not understand the Arab-Muslim theocratic mindset of what it means to destroy all of Israel and to impose a caliphate and to engage in whatever it is that they think is necessary to express their theocratic aims.
Tell me something he said that bothered you.
That was the whole thing bothers me because, again, it seems casual. It seems as if, we're going to stop all pathways to the bomb. The snackback provisions are going to work. The whole concept of breakout capacity is going to... these are great terms of art, but it's not clear to me whether any of them would work.
Okay. By the way, that to me is an interesting comment. It's not clear to me, you say. And I'm wondering how much is clear to anybody who is watching. The president mentioned that good friends tell each other the truth and are not afraid to tell each other the truth. Were you pleased with the questions?
Look, they were
Were you
edited.
pleased with the questions?
No.
Okay.
No.
Boy, you know, if you've been watching JBS, you know my enormous regard for Jerry Silverman, who heads the JFNA, and for Malcolm Hoenlein, who is the executive vice chairman of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations. I have the highest regard for JFNA and for the Conference of Presidents. Thane, I was so disappointed in the questions. They were terrible. By the way, somebody who was a good friend texted me, too softball and politically correct. They were softball. I could not believe the first two questions, which were asking about, the style of rhetoric. By the way, that's an issue. It's not the number one issue. I have the President of the United States in front of me. I'm going to say to him, does it upset you that people are saying bad things about each other? It's legitimate as the 15th question, not the first question. And the second question is, what's the relationship with Israel and the U.S.? That's a question I can ask him anytime. I wanted to hear somebody say, look, you talk about this verification process. That's the best verification process that's ever been in the history of mankind. Okay, well, how come they get 24 days to prepare? How come Iran is the only one who can do the soil samples? How come under certain circumstances there will only be inspections if 5 of the 8 coordinating countries that include China, Russia, Germany, and Iran, by the way, how come inspections require a majority vote of a committee before certain inspections can take place? How come Iran has the right to say no military installations will be subject to inspection? Mr. President, if you're telling me this is the best verification process ever devised, how does that square with what we understand to be the facts? I wanted to hear him speak to that.
I was shocked that the word side deal was not invoked.
Yes, why is there no discussion?
How did that word not show up?
Certain things, there were secret deals made. So, I have a chance for the Jewish world to ask the president the questions which are burning the Jewish community up, and I'm asking him, do you think it's nice the way we're talking to each other? By the way, he said something very interesting. As far as he's concerned, the right is far more vitriolic
Yes.
than the left.
Yes.
Is it true?
No.
It is true. Yes, it is.
Oh.
By the way, the left says to anybody...
You mean the left in supporting the deal?
Yes.
Right.
Those on the left say to those who disagree, you're a warmonger.
Right.
By the way, and we're not warmongers on either side. You're a warmonger. The right tells us we're anti-Semitic. That really we are participating in the destruction of the Jewish people. We're the most heinous things ever. That's what is being said by the right of those on the left. Both sides are saying nasty things. By the way, Sloan, I want to show an email I got. This is an email I got from an individual, and I've been getting hate. I get hate mail from the left and the right. Both sides think I'm being unfair. And all I'm trying to do on JBS is present you with the arguments from both sides. You have a right to hear both sides. You should want to hear both sides. Shane, do you have, Sloan, do you have the email? Put it up. Okay. It's by the way, it's hard for me to read. Can you read that?
I can.
Read it.
I have no idea of how you are reacting. I can't see
To the anti-Semitic.
to the anti-Semitic president's attempt to endanger the lives of another 6 million Jews. However, that is now irrelevant. Your so-called open policy has encouraged the reform movement to do what they do best. That is, to enable the fascists once again to destroy the Jewish people. And this comes from, may I provide the name?
Yeah, sure.
Martin Samuel.
Okay. And, I say to myself, Mark Golub influenced the reform movement. I have no contact with the reform movement. Rick Jacobs doesn't check with me before he goes and lobbies the reform movement. I'm not here trying to destroy the Jewish people. And by the way, if anybody watches JBS, all I'm trying to do is sustain the state of Israel, to defend the state of Israel, and to sustain American Jewish life. But because I haven't gone far enough in whatever position somebody takes, the next thing you know, I'm responsible for the destruction of the Jewish people. That's the rhetoric I'm hearing all the time from those on the right, who, by the way, very often are right in their objections to this deal. But there's no point in vilifying people who have an honest disagreement. And I have to tell you, I listened to the president. But if I had come from Mars, sat down and listened to this discussion, I thought he was superb. I think the right questions weren't asked. But I thought he spoke reasonably. I thought he justified his perspective. He expressed his commitment to Israel. He mentioned this they wrote, which you had mentioned earlier. So I'm saying if I didn't come with preconceived baggage and I just heard that discussion, there was nothing there were some things I'm going to tell you. Some things he said bothered me.
Let me hear.
But overall, I felt he did very well. Do you think I'm wrong?
No, I think, look, he's incredibly smooth, and he's very good at making this case. Again, the point I made before is there's just a casualness about it, as if these are more academic exercises and not real-world problems with real-world consequences. That's why I reacted to the idea about qualitative military edge, because if you're facing a side that says big Satan, little Satan, death to Israel, you're dealing with a very different kind of regime, not the kind of regime that has weapons like Germany and France and England, but a regime that's very likely going to use it. And so the concept of, well, they think they have the right also to have nuclear enrichment for peaceful purposes, and there's many reasons to doubt the sincerity of that aspiration. And I think this is the area where there's a fundamental question. The president continues to invoke words such as, we can verify, sanctions will snap back, breakout capacity will be thwarted. And yet, in fact, to people who are looking at this in a very sort of, look at what Iran is about, does anyone really believe that's possible? Or does anyone say, well, look, these are very good words. It's part of the language of a deal that we continued remember, we started off by saying we dismantle sanctions, you dismantle your entire nuclear.
Correct.
Right. That just seemed, talk about making it simple. That's pretty simple. But of course, we also have a president who was leading from behind in Libya.
By the way,
and
he did address that. What did you think of his answer? You did hear them. He said, I know people would like Iran to have no nuclear program at all, but the other nations of the world weren't going to hear. It had nothing to do with what people in Iran wanted. What he was saying was, the world has an attitude on what it means to abide by the Non-Proliferation Treaty. It does not extend to certain kinds of peaceful use of nuclear material, and that was something we were not going to win.
And the President of the United States, who's the leader of the world's largest democracy and is supposed to be the promoter of freedom, should also say to Iran, we respect your sovereign right for peaceful purposes to enrich uranium, but stop threatening Israel. Cut it out. Stop threatening to wipe off a country from a map. Anytime we hear a nation threatening another nation to wipe them off of a map, and then we hear about nuclear enrichment, we say, we don't trust you, and we won't allow it.
Okay, I'm not taking a position here. I'm trying to do the best I can to understand. The president says that ultimately this deal limits Iran to, at the moment, 3% enrichment. And you need close to 90% to create a nuclear weapon. He also said, and I hope it was interesting for me to hear it because it's the first time I've heard him say it or anybody say it, that after the 15 years, when it comes to their ability to have a nuclear program with military-grade uranium enrichment, that is prohibited, in his words, in perpetuity. Forever.
I had not heard that.
I had not either, okay? I found that an interesting comment. If, in fact, this deal prevents Iran from ever going with a nuclear program, that they have enrichment that even approaches weapons-grade uranium enrichment, that would mean one thing to me. If the deal means that they can, in perpetuity, never have it, that means something else to me. And I don't know why I didn't hear it till today.
Yeah, I too didn't hear it. But remember, look, this is a president that is very...
Okay, forgive me, Shane. I want to go to our phone because we have somebody who I'm thrilled to be able to talk to. You've heard him many times. Alan Dershowitz is the leading advocate, not only of civil and constitutional rights in the United States, but he's become the leading advocate on issues pertaining to the defense of the State of Israel. Alan, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I was not able to hear the entire conversation, but I think I have a good idea of what the thrust of it was.
Okay.
And,
what was your overall sense?
My overall sense is that I still don't know the answers to the 3 or 4 key questions. I don't know whether this is a deal which, by its terms, prevents Iran from ever, under any circumstances, developing nuclear weapons, as the preface to the deal states, whether that's American policy, and whether there is a military option that will be employed if Iran ever, under any circumstances, begins to develop nuclear weapons. I still don't know the answer to that question, or whether this is a 15-year postponement and we're relying on the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which Iran can easily get out of. I still don't know the answer to why Iran needs 24 days to move things around. As Jackie Mason says, when they come and see if a restaurant has bad tuna, they don't give them 24 days to get rid of the bad tuna. They inspect immediately without any kind of warning. Why do we need 24 days to move things around? I don't understand why there are still secret deals that we're not completely aware of. And I don't understand why this is not a treaty and why it can come to pass with either a filibuster by the Democrats or a veto by the president. Those are still my unanswered questions.
By the way, I wish you'd been asking the questions, and you...
Well, I was asked to ask a question, and I provided a question.
What was your question? What was your question?
Asked.
What was your question?
My question was, Mr. President, would you sign a bill stating that the deal, that the United States understands the deal as precluding Iran from ever, under any circumstances, developing nuclear weapons, and authorizing the president, you or a future president, to use military force to implement that part of the deal? That was the question that I wrote out. I was asked by the people who were sponsoring it to write that question. They said they would ask it, but I don't think it was asked.
They did not come close. And by the way, I just said, Alan, I love Jerry Silverman. I am a big fan of the JFNA. I love Malcolm Hoenlein, huge fan of the President's Conference. I was very, very disappointed with the softball questions that didn't ask the tough questions, just as you just did. Alan, from the moment...
I was asked to, by them,
I
to provide
understand.
a question, and they told me it would be the first question that would be asked.
Okay, I want you
And
to ask...
somehow they didn't ask it.
I want Thane to answer a question. I want to ask a question. Anyway, Alan, from the moment the deal was announced, you told me you thought the president had put America in a very bad position because, on the one hand, he had signed what you consider to be a very bad deal, but that the alternative, not endorsing the deal, would be even worse. Is this your position still?
No, not quite. In my book, The Case Against the Iran Deal, I say that even if the president says the alternative is worse, at least we can adopt a middle course, namely to say that if the deal is going to be accepted, it's accepted on the premise that the first part of the deal that says Iran reaffirms that it will never, under any circumstances, seek to obtain nuclear weapons. That's the American understanding of the deal, and the president is authorized to take action to implement that part of the deal. So that wouldn't be worse. And I don't know whether it would be worse. That's speculative. Right now, I would hope the deal would be defeated. It looks like that's unlikely to happen because there are too many Democratic senators that are probably going to vote for the deal. There are efforts underway by some, I have spoken myself to several senators. I have never spoken with congressmen as well. I haven't spoken to a single one who likes the deal. Mm-hmm. Even the ones who are voting for it don't like the deal, but they're voting for it because they think that the alternative is worse, or they want to support their president, or they don't want to see the Republicans get a victory. Whatever the reason is, they are voting for a deal that they do not think is a good deal. I've never met anyone who thinks this is a good deal except for the President of the United States and the Secretary of State, and I wonder whether they really think it's a good deal.
But you do remember telling me at one point your position was you were so upset because you felt that the alternative was worse.
Well, according to the president, the alternative is worse. I'm not sure. I think that's speculative. It may be worse. It may be better. It may force the Iranians to come back to the table and make a better deal. It may force the Europeans to reconsider. We don't know. It may be worse. I'm not going to challenge the president on that, but I'm saying if he's right, then he's put us in a position of choosing between bad and worse, choosing between putting a bullet to our head with Russian roulette with a 1 in 6 chance of getting our head blown off or having our head blown off immediately. I don't like those kinds of options.
Yes.
We should have a better option, and this deal was badly negotiated, and it provided us with 2 bad options, and I don't know which is worse.
Okay. I want you to know that during his answer to one question, he did claim that if Iran ever went, that Iran would never, in perpetuity, have the right to develop uranium enriched at a level that would create a nuclear weapon. In other words, in the future, there would be a relaxation on Iran's nuclear program, but it would never have the right, in perpetuity, to build a nuclear weapon or to have enough.
That's just not in the deal. That's just not in the deal. It may be in the preface to the deal. It may be in the president's interpretation of the deal combined with the Non-Proliferation Treaty. But the president said right after the deal was signed that this postpones this and that within 12, 13, 14, 15 years, they will be back within a striking distance of accomplishing a nuclear weapon. So the president has been talking out of both sides of his mouth on this issue. Okay. And that's why I don't know what the reality is at this point. If I were a congressman or a senator, I wouldn't know what I was voting on. I'd be buying a trafe pig in a poke.
Alan, what would you have American Jews who fear this deal threatens the existence of the State of Israel, what would you have American Jews do now?
Continue to fight against it. Never fear the label of dual loyalty. Never, ever fear that label. We as first-class citizens have the right to demand that America do what's right for America, what's right for world peace, what's right for Israel. Never be ashamed of standing up for Israel, of standing up for what you think is good for America. Whether you're opposing the Vietnam War or the Iraq War or this deal, you can be the most patriotic American and oppose American policy, as President Obama did when he opposed the invasion of Iraq.
Alan, do you believe that there are people who have as much integrity and want the best for both America and for Israel as those who oppose this deal? Can you be for this deal and also believe it's the best of all possible alternatives for the present time, and be an intelligent, thoughtful person? Or by definition, is somebody against this deal in some way betraying the Jewish people?
No, I think you can be mistaken, and I think there are people who are mistaken. They think this is the best deal we could have gotten. I think they're wrong. Look, when Noam Chomsky and Pat Buchanan favor something, and Wald and Mearsheimer favor something, generally you should be on the other side of that, because you know that Chomsky and Mearsheimer and Wald are always on the wrong side of anything relating to Israel. And they're all enthusiastic supporters of this deal. But there are also people who are not in favor of rejecting the deal now. People like Ephraim Halevi, who's a terrific man. I admire him enormously. And other Israeli intelligence officials who think that maybe this is not the worst deal in the world. I've never heard anybody say it's a great deal, and I have respect for them. I just think they're wrong, and I'm not going to engage in the kind of name-calling against President Obama that he's engaged in against the opponents of the deal. I think he is doing what he thinks is best for the country. He's just wrong.
One last question, Alan. You know, at the beginning, you stayed very supportive of the president as long as you possibly could. You know him. You've spoken with him. You've sat with him. When he says he really cares about the state of Israel, and he cares about the Jewish people, and he's committed to the relationship between Israel and the United States, do you believe him?
Well, he doesn't care about Israel as much as Bill Clinton or George W. Bush did. It's a matter of degree. He cares about Israel more than Jimmy Carter did. You have to, rank presidents by that standard, and he ranks somewhere in the middle, not high and not low. He's been good on national security issues. He has not been supportive of Israel on the Iran deal, and so I would rank him in the middle of American support for Israel. George Bush the first probably ranked about the same level as he ranks, and not very high. So I wouldn't use extremes. I would use calibrated analysis. Certainly better than Jimmy Carter, certainly not nearly as good as Bill Clinton or George W. Bush.
I understand. Alan, I'm sitting here with Thane Rosenbaum, who has a question for you.
Hi, Alan. Alan, two very quick questions. The first is, one of your best-selling books, Chutzpah, you make the argument very convincingly that it's not that Jews should be concerned about appearing to be pushy, that in fact they should have more chutzpah. They should actually assert their interests as Americans and as Jews. And I think at the time, frankly, Alan, that was a very original thought, because Jews had historically thought that they should sort of withdraw and not appear to have dual loyalty. So one question is, maybe you can speak a little to the question of dual loyalty, and whether also there's the number of American Jews who vote Democratic, who supported President Obama, whether what you're seeing here is another example of a certain level of timidity and a certain reluctance to display the chutzpah that you had so well
it's a good question. I think it's more complicated. I think a lot of Democrats, a lot of American Jews vote their memories. I was brought up as a liberal Democrat. Everybody in Borough Park, where I grew up, was a liberal Democrat. We loved Franklin Delano Roosevelt. We loved Mayor Wagner. We loved the Democrats, and I think there's a lot of habitualness that goes along with it. Second, the Republicans have shot themselves in the foot over and over again by coming out against women's rights, coming out against separation of church and state, coming out against gun control. I was thinking of writing a book called Why I Left the Left But Couldn't Join the Right. It's very hard for a liberal Jew to become a Republican these days. It's easy if you're a conservative and you believe in trickle-down economics and are against health care. But I support, health care, and I support women's right to choose, and I support gay marriage, and I support gun control, and I support separation of church and state. So I'm going to remain a Democrat. I'm going to fight very hard within the Democratic Party to make sure that the Democrats maintain the bipartisan nature of support for Israel. I met recently with Hillary Clinton, and, obviously it gave her advice along those lines. So my job is to help the Democrats maintain support for Israel, just like Republicans have to do that with the Republican Party. I have to admit, Republicans have a much easier job these days than we Democrats, but I accept challenges, and so my challenge is to keep the Democrats supportive of Israel.
Alan, one last question from me. Like most issues when it comes to of Jewish concern, you're usually in a unique position. And in this case, Mark alluded to it, but I think we should be emphasized more strongly. As a Harvard law professor, I think Barack Obama was one of your students. I knew you knew him well during that era when he was on the Law Review. You've remained close to him over the years. I believe that he considers you both a friend and an advisor. And yet, again, courageously, Alan, you have broken with, from that sense of conventional opinion of the Democratic left and taken a very strong view against this deal. But I just wonder, in a situation like this where you've known the man for so many years, do you find yourself personally disappointed?
I do. I'm not only personally disappointed, I feel personally that, I sat with him in the Oval Office, and he said to me, he used our friendship, and he said, Alan, you've known me for a long time, and you know that I never bluff, and the military options on the table, Iran will never be able to develop military use of nuclear weapons. I don't know, as I talk to you right now, whether he meant that when he said it. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt and say he did and he changed his policy. In my book, The Case Against the Iran Deal, I chart his change of policy. I quote what he said before his reelection, what he said between his reelection and the midterms, and then what he said after the Democrats lost the midterms and when he took the military option off the table. So I am disappointed. And I stated publicly I think Romney would have been a much better job on the Iran deal than President Obama did. But I think President Obama did a great job on health care and a number of other things. So I am disappointed, and I'm disappointed both personally and politically. And I've drawn myself some red lines about who I can vote for in the future. For example, I will never vote for any senator or congressman who walked out on Prime Minister Netanyahu's speech. I think that was just disgraceful. And that, for me, has been a red line. And I've told some people who are friends of mine who are in the Senate and the House that they can never again count on my support because they walked out.
Alan, you've been a courageous spokesperson. Again, I keep saying this. It's not simply about Israel, but on issues pertaining to the United States of America and constitutional rights. And you know how long and profound my connection has been to you, and I am very, very grateful.
Likewise. I so appreciate what you do on the air to inform and educate generations of your listeners, American Jews and non-Jews alike. So keep doing it. Keep doing great things.
Thank you, my friend. We'll talk often. You be well.
Great. Be well. You too. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat
Bye.
shalom. Alan Dershowitz, again, one of the leading constitutional experts who's been fighting for civil rights and for human rights all over the world. And now, of course, he is one of the most articulate and forceful spokespersons on behalf of the State of Israel. And some people don't like him, and some people disagree with him, but nobody questions the passion and the integrity he brings to whatever issue he's trying to speak on. We continue to stay here on our phones because I have a very special guest also. I'm pleased to welcome back to JBS the national president of the progressive organization Amenu, a member of the Jewish Agency Board of Governors, and a member of the board of J Street's Education Fund, Kenneth Bob. Ken, thank you so much for joining us.
Great to be with you again.
Did you watch the dialogue between the president and American Jewry?
Certainly did.
Okay. What was the most important thing you heard the president say in his conversation?
Well, I would say that the most important thing to me was the focus on the relationship between Israel and the United States going forward. I think that it's becoming increasingly clear that the deal is going to be implemented. There won't be enough opposition in Congress to stop that. So I think the discussion about the day after and the importance of the relationship is critical. I think both the words and the tone were very reassuring.
Mm-hmm. By the way, we should make sure people remember, how many children do you have right now in Israel?
I have 2 children living in Israel.
What are they doing?
They are both working as educators of both Israeli kids. One daughter works in an Israeli school, and my son works with diaspora kids who come to Israel.
Fabulous. I say that because I want people to understand your profound connection personally with the state of Israel. You know, there are honest concerns among Jews who speak with me and who are seriously worried that this is, Ken, a disastrous deal. On one hand, they worry that the inspection and verification process, which the president lauds, has serious flaws. As Alan Dershowitz just said, why should Iran have 24 days for anything? Why should Iran be able to say that certain military installations are not subject to inspections? Why is Iran alone permitted to take soil samples in certain places? So that there are people who are worried about the deal, not for political partisan reasons, but because they fear that Iran will have a very good chance of circumventing the inspection process at a certain point in time, whether it's 8 years out, 10 years out, 15 years out, or longer. And so that one of the things that we were hoping to hear the president speak to were some of the specific apparent flaws in this deal. What's your sense of the problems that people see in that regard?
My sense is the following. It's clearly not a perfect deal, and I don't think that that's the case I would make to your viewers today. I think, however, that people are jumping on small details that really don't hold the weight of what we're really looking at here. I have sat face-to-face with the Secretary of Energy of the United States, Moniz, who says that this concern about the 24 days is simply not supported by science. So if I'm going to sit with a nuclear physicist who's our Secretary of Energy, who's taken an oath in office to defend this country, I'm just going to have to believe him. And so that's where I am on those types of details. And when I'm told by multiple people that this is the most stringent inspection regime in the history of nuclear inspections, I'm actually going to believe them. So I understand some of the concerns. I'm not any more of an expert than Professor Dershowitz is on nuclear matter and what can be found after 24 days. So I'm going to go with experts on this. So again, I'm less troubled because in the end of the day, exactly what the president just said, this is not based on trust. It's based on the inspections. And if indeed the critics are absolutely right, and again, it's not based on trust. So I agree with the critics. And if the Iranians cheat, then the U.S. and the world community will have every moral right and obligation to use military means to stop them from getting a weapon.
In this regard, there's another concern that the United States, which took no military action against Iran when it was only 2 or 3 months away from building a bomb in the last few years, there's a worry that it will not take action, that a President Obama, although really President Obama will no longer be in office, but they're worried that there may be a president who has his orientation, who will not take action to stop Iran militarily, should they begin to enrich uranium at rates that are only used for nuclear weapons. Does that concern you, Ken?
Oh, no, not at all. I think that's a completely unfair criticism, and I'll explain why. There was use the expression with Obama's orientation. Well, there was another president, President Bush, who didn't have President Obama's orientation, who also didn't take military action, who actually, in similar documents that had been shared with me, also first favored looking for a diplomatic solution. So the president, a few years ago, embarked upon search for a diplomatic solution. 2 years ago, came to an interim agreement, which, by the way, the Iranians more or less observed for 2 years. Even the fiercest critics, as the president pointed out, have agreed that actually the Iranians stuck more or less with this interim process. So you can criticize Obama for lots of things, but it would have been silly to consider military action over the last few years when actually first trying diplomacy has been the American policy going back to the Bush administration with Iran. So I think that's really an unfair criticism, and we'll have to see what the next president does. And I think that'll be another discussion. I'm sure we're all going to be very vigilant. But to criticize the president for not doing something in the last few years seems really inconsistent.
Ken Thane Rosenbaum has a question for you.
Hi, Ken.
Hi.
Mark, you might not have heard this, but on the air immediately after the president's remarks had some interesting things to say about the nature of the questions and that they were of a softball variety. And there were many questions that Mark and I would have hoped would have been asked. The one that I felt strongly about was, Mr. President, you seem so clear that had Secretary Kerry walked away from the table, or I guess with crutches, hobbled away from the negotiating table, and there was no deal at the end, and there was an attempt to instead keep the sanctions for as long as possible, the very next effect of that would have been war. Are you of that view? I mean, are you of the view that that there was no other choice because any other choice would have simply led to war now, and it would be better at least to kick the can down the road for 15 years and let someone else have this headache?
Well, let's unpack that a little bit. It depends on what the situation would have been. If the international sanctions regime would have held together because there wasn't a deal, then potentially, and I say potentially because we don't know, we're talking hypotheticals here, maybe the sanctions regime could have held together longer and forced Iran to a different deal. But the fact is, the P5+1 came to an agreement on this deal. So then I believe this notion of a better deal doesn't exist. Could have there been a hypothetical better deal if we would have walked away from the table all united? Maybe. But then again, I think the key thing that people are missing here is we now have more of a stark choice. There's a deal that the P5+1 agreed to. So if the U.S. is the only party, then again doesn't approve it, then that whole international unity falls apart. And I think as everyone realizes, even a lot of the critics of the deal, that the sanctions regime is history, the unified one. So all you have left is the U.S., and there's a lot of good reasons I could go into why the U.S. itself cannot, put the kind of sanctions in place that will stop Iran.
Ken, it is wonderful to share have you on here to share a perspective, and I want to turn to you often because sometimes, Ken, it's hard to find individuals who are articulate on both sides of the issue, and I understand how much you support this. You've never said it's a perfect deal, but for you, as there are in many in the Jewish community, this seems to you to be the best of the alternatives, and I appreciate your coming on to give us your perspective.
Thank you for having me. I look forward to returning.
Thank you, my friend. Kenneth Bob, the national president of the Progressive Organization, Amenu. We're going to put our phone number up on the screen, and we're going to try to get a couple calls in. I would just, again, if there's somebody here who has been watching JBS and you have a cogent comment for either myself or for Thane, please give us a call. And again, I'm only looking for what was your sense. Did the president say something that impressed you? Did the president say something that bothered you? Those are the questions I'd love somebody to call and just tell me what impressed you or what bothered you. I want to tell you one more thing that bothered me, and I really want to hear you speak to this. Again, I thought the president spoke very, very well. There were problems with his argument, and I think he wasn't pushed hard enough at all. But for what he did, I thought he did very, very well. Again, you come from Mars, you'd never know. But there was something that did bother me. He described Iran, and he described Iran with these words. They're antagonistic to the United States and Israel, they're anti-Semitic, and they're unsavory. I'm sorry. Those words don't come near describing what Iran is, the evil they represent, the extreme jihadist caliphate orientation where they believe they have the right for world domination. It's not about them being antagonistic. They want to kill us. It's not about them simply being anti-Semitic. They want to wipe Israel off the face of the map, and they want every Jew gone. It's not that they're unsavory. It sounds like, a piece of steak that isn't done well. They're vile. And part of the problem I've had is, yes, you negotiate with your enemies, and I hope people understand the subtlety of your point. We're not dealing with the Soviet Union. But when we dealt with Nazi Germany, we demanded unconditional surrender. They were our enemy. We sat at a table with them, but we required unconditional surrender. We sat with a Japan that had attacked Pearl Harbor and had been horrific in the Philippines, and that ultimately against whom we used 2 atomic bombs. When we sat at the table with them, we demanded unconditional surrender. And after that, by the way, we rebuilt both economies and both civilizations, and they're now our allies. But it began with unconditional surrender. You sit with Iran, fine. You negotiate with Iran, fine. But basically your position, it seems to me, should be, Iran, there's no opportunity for you to continue your war against us. You are at war against us. It's not that you're unsavory. You are vile. I want your reaction.
I could not agree with you more. Look, the United States was in a far worse position by kicking the can down the road before World War II. Every attempt was to remain isolated, to not get involved, to not intervene. And nobody took Hitler seriously until it was too late. I think we just don't give enough credit to the intentions of madmen. You know, when people say crazy things, we walk away from them and think, you know, they don't mean it.
It's not about saying crazy things. They sponsor terrorism around the world.
Right.
They fund the missiles that are given to Hezbollah and to Hamas. They attack Marine bases. They attack American ships.
They assassinate ambassadors.
Yes, this isn't that they're not. Their rhetoric isn't nice.
The bombing,
it's not about their rhetoric. It's about what they do.
The bombing of the JC, the Jewish Community Center in Buenos Aires, in Buenos Aires, is Iran.
Yeah.
You know, we should have been able to walk into the negotiating table and said, look, unfortunately, you are a victim of really awful past behavior, abominable. We have no reason to believe anything you have to say. We see you as being only interested in mischief, mayhem, and madness, monstrous behavior. And so for this reason alone, this is going to be the toughest negotiation you're ever going to see. The answer to anything you want is going to be no, because you deserve nothing better than no. And instead, we treated them as diplomats.
Yes.
We treated them as statesmen instead of thugs.
Okay, I think you said very well. I respect what the president tried to do, but I don't think that there was an honest assessment of who was on the other side of the table. That are my views. We're going to go to our phones right now. We'll get a quick couple of phone calls in, Sloan. I want to go to Surprise, Arizona, and welcome Barry. Barry, thank you for joining us. Is Barry there? One more time. Barry, are you there? Somebody speak in my ear. What's happening? Barry, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Barry, what was your response as you watched the president address American Jewry?
Hello, Rabbi. Here's my question. The United States holds all the cards in this, and what a question I would like to have heard is why... Pardon me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, here's my question. Yes, I did. I did.
Don't watch your TV. You're on the air. Turn your TV sound off and just talk to me on the phone.
Why is that John Kerry...
I'm sorry, Barry.
Why is it that John Kerry did not demand from the Iranians that they get rid of Hezbollah to the point that there would be an actual visual...
Barry, I really appreciate the call. There's a real problem here. I'm sorry, we have to go to the next call. We're going to go to Washington, D.C., and welcome Matthew Brodsky, who is a Middle East policy analyst. Matthew, are you there? Is Matthew there? I apologize to our audience that we're having technical difficulties here. And I love the fact that people are calling. Do we have Matthew on the...
Yes,
Matthew,
you do. How are you?
I'm good. Matthew, I have a specific question. Bowie, are you a Middle East policy analyst?
I am. I'm at Wikistrat. I'm also the former director of policy at the Jewish Policy Center.
Okay, a specific question for you.
Sure.
Did something the president say either impress you or bother you?
Well, what bothered me is that there was really nothing at all new in this. I mean, he didn't call Jews in general warmongers or the crazies, which is you would expect from it. But what he didn't discuss, or I guess which is a problem of the questions that were asked, there were simply stunning, simple questions, sophomoric. They didn't advance the debate.
Yes,
no one
you're right.
discussed anything about the IAEA side deal with Iran. He dodged the question about snapback sanctions. He didn't actually say how that would happen. He repeated the assertion that the U.S. will be better positioned in 15 years to deal with Iran, but that seems impossible given the lifting of the conventional and ballistic missile ban. He didn't explain why he's not doing anything right now to unilaterally strengthen the agreement. I think the questions that would have best been served are the ones that Rob Satloff essentially have published with The Atlantic with Jeffrey Goldberg, 10 questions from a conversation a day or two ago. Those are real questions that deserve answers, and we didn't get those answers from this.
Matthew, I think you're absolutely right. Very quickly, 15 seconds. Where do you stand on the deal as a whole? Do you think American Jewry should be trying to block it, or do you think the alternative would be worse?
I think we should be trying to block it, and I think there should be a better deal negotiated. There are a few positions that have been staked out even by Senator Bob Menendez. If you read his speech, he gives a plan of what we can do, and others at think tanks and other congresspeople have also given a plan. But it's something that can be blocked. It's not the end of the world as it's being portrayed. That's a strawman argument.
Matthew, I appreciate your calling in. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom. I feel terrible. I wanted to be another hour with you, Thane.
I'll come back.
You will, by the way. Thank you very much for coming in and sharing this time with me.
Always, Mark.
And your analysis is always penetrating, and I appreciate it very, very much.
And I'm very much honored always sitting next to you.
Thank you. This is your chair.
Thank you.
Thane Rosenbaum. My thanks also to Carol Lilienthal, who was a producer of this edition of In the News, the speech of the address by President Obama to the Jewish community through the JFNA and the President's Conference. Also thanks to Sloan Copeland, our director. Great job, Sloan. To JBS Associate Director Dara Golub, in our control room, Corey Sivakov, Dennis Golan, and to Jan Weiss for all she does to help me prepare and work through the program. And I hope our ongoing coverage of this debate over the Iran nuclear deal has been meaningful to you. And permit me a plug for JBS. We're about to enter the high holiday season, which typically is a time when Jews make sure they're supporting worthwhile Jewish causes that contribute to the safety and security of the State of Israel and the survival of the Jewish future here in America. If you believe JBS makes this kind of contribution, please, at this holiday season, be as generous as you can possibly be to help support and sustain the only serious Jewish television channel on all of American television, bringing you the most vital information and knowledge we all need by giving you access to programs like this one with the kind of people you heard on this show, Thane and to Alan Dershowitz and to Ken Bob. So please visit our website at www.jbstv.org, and you can donate by clicking on the Donate tab at the top of the web, the homepage. Or you can also write to me, and you can send donations tax deductible to JBS at 180 Riverdale Station, Post Office Box 180 Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. You see it all the time. And to all of you who will make JBS possible, who will keep us on the air. Just like PBS, we rely on you for the support we need to stay on the air. I thank every one of you who has in the past sent us your financial support, and to all of you who will do so as we enter this high holiday season. This issue is far from over. I've been honored to be able to bring you as much as I can. I believe it's a very complex issue. And I respect people on both sides of the aisle, both sides of this issue. I don't need to vilify anybody, but I do feel we need as much information as we possibly can get. And I hope JBS helps you get more information and it becomes clearer. Sometimes it's more complicated, isn't it? But every now and then it should become more clear to all of us what our final position will be. And I respect everyone who takes this issue seriously wherever they come out on the matter. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Shabbat Shalom. Be well, my friends.